because we're short on time now. That's me. I feel great. I just did a study. It was cool. You should read the study. It was cool. We cleared 18 out of the 19 GI tract infections in the research study. We just did a bunch of herbal stuff, adrenal and GI stuff, but we tracked it really, really carefully. Working with Sue Cutshall and Larry Bergstrom at Mayo Clinic was an eye-opening and really kind of enlightening experience for me. And I want to do more research now. We're actually looking at doing another study with a different group of academics. And hey, research is great. I love it. I learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes. I did all the clinical application work myself, meaning I did all the patient treatments and designed all the programs, talked to all the patients throughout the whole 6 months. And, I'm just enthusiastic about functional medicine more than ever. I find that it works better than ever, and we have great technology, and that's really what tonight's about too, is talking about the GI map test. What I hate to see the most of all things that I see all the time, is when practitioners aren't doing well financially, and I feel like part of what I want to help do is create groups that can work together in the sense that we have this community now. We can support each other. We spent an hour this morning in the class with one of the doctors showing us his new website and describing how he built it, so we all know how to do that now. I mean, we really want to bind together as much as possible as a community and support each other financially so we can all make a go of this and be comfortable. I don't want a jet or a sailboat. I want my kid to go to college and a couple of fast cars, and that's about all I need. So we're not talking about tons and tons of money, but financial stability so we can really focus our creative energies on helping patients. And we find a lot of business challenges, and I'm really trying to help solve that as much as possible with the various teaching and classes that we do. And as well as clinical challenges, of course, which is what we're going to talk about more tonight, complex patients. And one thing I also want to talk about just briefly is, every single great functional medicine doctor that I knew 10, 15, 20 years ago, every single one of them, 100% of them, had a very complex practice. And those that are still in practice still have really complex practices. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that we can work on patients before they get super complicated and super sick. And if I think of a simple example, if you were a shepherd and you had a flock of like 1,000 goats and you're wandering through the mountains of Spain or something, and you notice that 5 or 10 of your goats started to get sick and had chronic, the goat version of chronic fatigue and couldn't climb up the mountains anymore. Of course, you'd throw them in the barn, not make them walk around and graze, but you'd also try to figure out what was wrong with them, and then not just help them get better, but help the rest of the flock, right? And I feel like we're helping 5 or 10 goats with this chronic illness world that we're treating, and we're leaving the rest of the flock unattended to, all those people that have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, maybe the early stages of diabetes, maybe they don't have cancer yet, but they're heading in that direction. So I really want us to also, as much as we can in our practices, focus on simple cases and try to prevent these chronic illness crises from happening in the first place. And also, hopefully tonight, we can do a little confidence building. And I know for me in my own practice, as I've grown to be a better doctor, I've gotten more and more confident in the accuracy and reliability of the testing that I use. And so this new technology that's come out, I'm really excited about. I've been using it since the data lab opened. And not only in my own practice, but we see every week in the training program, lots of these labs coming through. And we're seeing some really good results and some real positive information coming with this new technology. So I wanted to present it, and I feel like it's not the answer, and there never is one answer, but this is really something we should all know about and have as a tool in our toolbox to run with, side by side, the more standard stool testing that we're already all doing, and also as a standalone test as well. So let's talk a little bit about it. It's a DNA-based test. It's a new technology, of course, and when I, again, look back at the people that trained me, they were always using new technology because functional medicine was brand new. And so, organic acids testing, salivary adrenal assays, all this stuff was new when it first started to get applied. And so I feel like our role is to get the new technology, try it with patients, see how effective it is clinically, and see if it should, become part of what we use. And this is certainly a technology that I'm super excited about. I think the lab companies out there have been playing around with DNA testing for, more than 10 years, 10, 15 years, and I think they're really starting to figure it out and figure out how it can work exceptionally well. And I'm certainly starting to see that. Also want to talk a little bit of, in addition to building confidence, relying on the testing, ideas about, working with simple cases, not just complex cases. and also thinking about sequencing. So we can look at maybe a few cases and how we can start to sequence various programs, okay? And then these are questions I get asked every single day. I had patients all day yesterday. I had patients, you know, the day before that, and this is what everyone wants to know. So I just wanted to throw it out there. Not that you need to memorize these or even pay attention to exactly what I'm answering the questions with, but just the idea that we should all have some pretty well-defined stock answers to patient questions that everyone asks. And the reason for this is that it's really nice to have a system or a model that you can present to patients so they have some clarity about what's happening and they don't think that all of this is random and coincidental and confusing. So like the question of why am I sick, why is this happening in the first place? I always talk about the three body systems and look at the neuroendocrine, GI, and detox systems and say, you know, typically people are stressed, emotional, spiritual disconnection, there's some kind of financial stress, or there's some kind of push on the neuroendocrine system, the GI system falters, people become toxic as a result of all this, and we want to look at these three body systems to determine exactly where your symptoms are coming from. So trying to keep your responses simple, you don't obviously have to use the three body system idea, that's just what I use, but having something that's equivalent to that so that you can educate patients really quickly about what you're trying to do with the labs. I like the three body systems because it kind of fits in well with the testing itself, and so it's an easy explanation. And then that other question is, okay, well, I'm doing all these labs, but they're not going to be in for a few weeks. What can I do right now to feel better? My response to that 100% of the time is, well, there's 4 lifestyle changes. And you can start those right now, and you don't have to wait to sleep well to start now. You don't have to wait to change your diet till the labs come in. You know, we can work on diet, exercise, sleep, and meditation now while we're waiting for the labs to come in. So really emphasizing and starting with lifestyle changes as treatment. And then this one is, I mean, I ask almost every patient asks this, you know, I'm tired all the time. Is there something I can do about that? And I really like to focus on the three body systems in that answer. To me, that's adrenal and thyroid related problems. Could be related to the brain, or it could be related to mitochondrial energy. And use that as an explanation so it entices them to want to test adrenal and thyroid function, test brain health, and test for mitochondrial energy pathways. So again, these answers then feed into the necessity to do the labs. And I feel like that's what we're doing as we're educating patients, is each one of my answers to these questions that are asked by everybody, the punchline at the end of it is you should do the tests. Because the three body systems are how people get sick. Well, guess what? There's a lab test for each body system. What can I do right now to get better? Well, there's 4 lifestyle changes that you can make. We better get started with that right now. What about my fatigue, or what about, you know, losing weight? Well, there's 3 reasons why that could be happening. It could be damaged metabolism, adrenal thyroid issues, could be brain related, could be mitochondrial energy production. Let's test each one of those and figure this out so that your stock answers then lead to the conclusion from the patient's perspective that I better do these labs. That way we're not wasting our time. And we're not trying to educate people in some random way, but we're educating them with a purpose. We're educating them. It's like I'm in the process now of painting an old car. I bought this 1971 Alfa Romeo. It's a beautiful car, and within a week or 2 of owning it, after 50 years of driving around on this planet and never being hit, it got hit by a monster truck. It's a true story. And can you believe it? It's a 50-year-old car. I got in an accident like a few weeks after I bought it. So anyways, I'm going to the paint shop. I'm talking to the paint guy, and, you know, he's clearly, it's like me being a doctor, right? I don't know anything about vintage car painting, but this guy's an expert on it. And he stepped me through the whole process about how he's going to fix my car, the different options, how much it might cost. He clearly had been through this hundreds of times with vintage car owners, and it was a very comforting feeling. He was really selling me on buying this product from him, but I felt very much like he was actually taking care of me. And I think that's the tenor and tone that we want to try to reach with our patients, is education. And yes, they're going to spend money with us, but it's really, there's a higher purpose here. We're trying to help people get better, and all the financial concerns are really, you know, focused on getting that patient healthier. Underlying cause, physiological damage, body systems, and symptoms. Tonight we're just looking at this one little etching in here, right? Just the GI part. But there is a bigger picture with the treatment model, obviously, that we always look at. And in terms of you know, program design, again, always thinking about designing the program so it meets the goals of the patient and that they're getting their needs met as the #1 priority. Here's the 3 body systems. If you've heard me talk before, you've heard this: neuroendocrine, GI, detox. Again, not to get out of context here, we're just looking at the GI tonight, but with every patient we test neuroendocrine, test detox. Every single patient in my clinic, we try to make sure we do all the labs. Okay. But I want to focus more specifically on just the GI map test tonight. And I've got a bunch of samples from my clinic that we've been running in the last couple months that I want to show you. It's looks like, on the surface, like a typical stool test. You can see the various categories that they screen for. Bacterial pathogens, like we're all familiar with, things like C. diff. Parasites like crypto, E-histo, giardia. There's a little mix-up in here, a little new stuff that they're doing. Viral pathogens, usually we don't see those. Somebody maybe have an acute exposure to some viral bug. A really great workup for H. pylori. They look at some of the normal flora, opportunistic bacteria, dysbiotic bacteria, the non-pathogen parasites, but ones that in functional medicine we typically treat, like blasto, Dientamoeba fragilis, Endolimex nana. In my practice, I always treat those, but perhaps in conventional medicine, they don't see them as true pathogens. Has a really great yeast and fungal overgrowth workup. And then it looks at SIGA, secretory IgA, the immune response in the gut, looks for gliadin markers, elastase 1 for pancreatic enzymes, lactoferrin for blood, lactoferrin for inflammation, and occult blood. And I have to say, and I don't know if he's on the call right now, but we had a class yesterday, seems like a million years ago, yesterday morning, and one of the doctors brought up a really, really important point. And there was occult blood that showed up on one of these screening tests, and he told a quick story, and I'll just repeat it, short version of it. He ran a routine test like this on his wife. They found occult blood on the test. They were somewhat alarmed by that. It had been going on for a while. She had blood in her stool, but she didn't think much of it. They brought her in. She got a GI screening with a gastroenterologist. She had very, very early stages of intestinal cancer. They were able to surgically remove the cancer. She's totally fine and healthy now. And what a wonderful thing that we can use these labs to find, potentially life-threatening medical conditions. So if you ever do see occult blood show up, that's an immediate GI referral. Maybe make sure the patient goes right in, not like later, next year, but right away that week to get a good evaluation and make sure there's no potential for cancer or any kind of serious illness going on. Okay, so not really the main point of doing a GI map, but these things show up and we just want to be prepared. Oh, and if you're really interested in learning more about this test, I'm going to be doing a series of talks throughout the country, Columbus, Washington, D.C., Salt Lake City, Phoenix, and Atlanta. These are the dates. And we'll be doing a whole afternoon on the GI map and clinical treatment options and, in person. It'd be really great to meet any of you who would like to show up. If you're in any of these cities, you can look at the Designs for Health website and see about the timing for these. But it'd be really wonderful to meet you all in person. I do a lot of these online things, and it's always great when I get out and actually get to shake hands and meet people and talk to them. So now, we're going to come back to this in a minute. So in terms of patients, this is the hardest conceptual thing to get down, and I still struggle with it after all these years, which is that when we think about GI cases and what patients do we want to run a GI test on, we're thinking about gas, bloating, we're thinking maybe about constipation, diarrhea, we're thinking about people that had acid reflux. But equally so, and maybe even more important, is to screen for GI problems with your patients that have anxiety, with your patients that have weight problems, certainly with your patients that are depressed, okay? So these are all really critical issues to face. And it's not like GI testing is just reserved for the obvious cases of GI problems, okay? And again, one of the hardest things I've had to figure out over the years is that I just run a GI test on everybody, and that's, kind of become my go-to version of how to do this. Now, is my sound again not working? Is that really possible? Can someone let me know if they can hear me? Just throw a yes. It is working? Okay. So if you're having sound problems, it's probably on your end. I'm not sure what's happening with my end. I think it's pretty good. Sorry. I don't know what the problem is. I got, by the way, upgraded internet service. We have the fastest internet on the planet right now. It's 200 megabytes or whatever flying around here. So then, And then once you find the GI infection and once you get the GI test back, and then the really big question is, when are you going to treat the GI infections? And I think one of the most valuable things that I was taught by Dr. Timmons is that you should just hold your horses and wait and treat the GI problems when it's to your advantage to do so, and don't do it early. Okay? So if you're tempted to treat the GI infections immediately, just take a complete assessment and make sure you map out the whole next year of that patient's case and see where the GI treatments are going to fit the best. Okay? And we'll show some patient sequencing things in a minute so you can kind of get a sense of what I mean by that. Another thing that is really problematic is that you run a lab test. It could be one of the great companies. It could be a GI map. It could be any one of the other great labs out there, and it comes back normal. And you know they have a GI problem, but the test didn't find anything. Run another test. I run 2 GI tests from competing companies on many, many patients. I routinely run 2 GI panels from 2 different companies on any patient that I suspect has a long-term GI problem. And if I see a normal test come back on the initial round of testing and I still suspect there's GI problems, never hesitate to order a backup test. Okay? And we'll often just use one lab. And I'm not saying that this one lab company is the best because they're in the mix with all these other great companies, but make sure that you have 2 or 3 companies that you can choose from. And if your go-to favorite lab doesn't find anything, be open enough to run another lab from another company to look for GI problems. And that's how we all start to learn, what are the better lab companies and what are companies that are going to be more responsive to what you want to do. And the big undermining factor in our ability to successfully treat GI problems is when people are stressed out of their minds. Their cortisol is out of balance, their thyroid is out of balance, and they're having all kinds of issues that are, just going to be a big problem, okay? And if we don't address these head on in the very beginning, it's really hard to permanently clear GI problems. So emotional stress, dietary stress, getting the inflammation in the gut down, figuring out what's the best diet for that particular person even, that can all take a month or 2. And if you're jumping in and trying to kill GI pathogens before you even figure out what's a healthy diet for that patient, you're just undermining the likelihood of your success. So dealing with the stress component, super important to get started with. I happen to do adrenal testing and adrenal protocols frequently. You may be more focused on thyroid or more focused on diet or exercise or sleep patterns, lifestyle coaching, whatever it is that you're doing in that first month or 2 to really get that person centered so they're prepared to go on and do the GI treatments, okay? But just not jumping into the GI treatments right away. So there's a couple of bugs that are historically pretty hard to find and also a little hard to know exactly what you want to do with. And let me just show you on the GI map. I've got some examples here of actual tests from my clinic. H. pylori I thought was worthy of special mention because they test for it in a different way. So here's the H. pylori section of the test. I'll highlight it for you all. So what they do is they take a single stool sample. One stool sample completes the whole lab. Patient ships that off to the lab company. And then they have some complicated procedure. I have no idea how these machines actually work that amplifies the DNA that's in that particular sample for H. pylori, for Cryptosporidium. Then researchers in hospitals and medical institutions throughout the world have ascertained in independent studies that are unrelated to this GI map company what are the thresholds for an active infection. And so one of the nice things about this particular test and this particular company is that it's third-party validated, meaning that if you sent this same sample to a research hospital in Helsinki, Finland, or in Nagasaki, Japan, they should find the exact same results because they're using the same FDA-approved technology that's being used in institutions throughout the world. Okay, so it's not a home-baked test that they made up. It's something that's in general consensus throughout the scientific community that this stuff is real. Okay, and that's been a problem in the past with GI testing, and this company has tried to overcome that by making this test more sort of scientifically legitimate, I guess you'd say. So when you see H. pylori, you should be confident that it's there. They also check for these virulence factors, and if they're positive, then you know you have not only an H. pylori case on your hands, but someone who is probably having a lot of negative experiences because of the H. pylori. And as you know, there's controversy about treating H. pylori. Sometimes you may not want to treat it. The virulence factor really gives you the go-ahead to know that not only does this person have H. pylori, but it's causing a pretty significant problem for this particular patient. The other thing is nice is they cover C. diff. The C. diff is pretty hard to find on standard stool testing. I think it's often missed. You know, I don't see it that often with all the other good quality lab companies I use, and it's something that they can recover with this DNA technology frequently. There's another one that's worthy of mention. I'll show you here. There. This one is super important, is E-histo. So Entamoeba histolytica, something I'm very familiar with, something, you know, kind of like an old friend you haven't seen in 10 or 15 years, isn't it? Because E-histo, gosh, 20 plus years ago, for those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a lab in Beverly Hills that used to run a special panel for E-histo. And the state of California forced them to stop selling that test because of legal reasons, not because it wasn't necessarily not accurate, it just didn't comply with all the testing standards and whatnot. And it just wasn't financially feasible for the lab to get the verification that they needed. So that test was taken off the market a long, long time ago. And ever since then, I have found only a few E-histos in my practice for the last 10, 15 years. Whereas when that testing technology was available from the lab called Immunosciences in Beverly Hills, which is no longer with us, we used to find E-histo all the time. And it was a PCR test that they were doing back in those days. And again, that got taken off the market. So it's back. E-histo is back, and it's on this test. And if you have a lot of experience with E-histo, which most of you probably don't because most of the labs never find it, but back in the day, I had a ton of experience with E-histo. This is the mother of all GI infections. This is the one that just makes you want to cry and give up your whole clinical career because this is the damaging one. And if this is present in a patient and you miss it, which is typically what happens because of the limits of standard O&P testing, this is just a ruinous, ruinous infection. And we're seeing it showing up now frequently in the GI map test. And probably one of the things I'm the most excited about with this test is E-histo because, like I said, it's like an old friend. I mean, we used to find it all the time at Immunosciences with their sophisticated technology. There's been a 10 or 15-year gap where I've probably missed hundreds of cases of E-histo in my clinic just because the lab technology wasn't available to find it. And it's back. And it's worth running this test just to look for E-histo. If you don't have a ton of experience with E-histo, I'm happy to kind of coach you through that because it's a super important infection. You know, if I look back to those early years when I did find E-histo on a regular basis, I can still remember most of the first names of those patients from 20 years ago. Like there was Nancy, there was Bill, there's a guy named Jason. I mean, like I can still remember those E-histo patients. That's how important this infection is because it's a life-changing bug to find. Those are going to be people you're going to remember the rest of your career because when you find this infection and treat it successfully, it completely transforms people as much or more than any other infection in the gut that I've ever treated. So very excited about E-histo being back. If you ever do find it on one of these labs and you're not sure exactly what to do, feel free to just give my office a call. I'm happy to talk to you for a few minutes and tell you a little bit about what I know about E-histo, okay? That one's super important. Of course, they also look for crypto and Giardia. We're finding a lot of Giardias on these labs as well, which is really handy. Okay, so crypto, Giardia, E-histo, blasto, we're seeing these frequently. Now, hard to find yeast on typical stool testing. This is not the fault of the labs. They try their best. I talk to all these people at seminars and conferences. Everyone in this industry is trying their best. I don't feel like there's anyone out there that's trying to fake us out and do poor quality testing. But there's limitations to the different technologies, and it's really hard to find Candida albicans on a typical stool test because most of the viable yeast organisms are dead or gone by the time the sample gets to the lab. It's a very big problem. And as you know, I'm sure you see patients with yeast overgrowth clinically, you know it's there, but the lab misses it. So they're a little bit better at finding it on the GI map, and that's something that's been really encouraging for me as well. Now, something that is probably in my practice this last year, the most exciting kind of breakthrough for me personally is starting to really put together oxidative stress, mitochondrial damage, GI problems, and toxicity, and kind of to wrap that into a really neat package in my own mind. And of course, I study these as you have independently, but now I kind of see it all in a synergistic way. So to put it simply, if someone has poor stomach function, poor digestion, they're not absorbing amino acids, they got a lot of inflammation in their gut. This all generates huge amounts of oxidative stress. The free radicals damage the mitochondria, and eventually we start to have patients complaining of fatigue, of the inability to run liver detox pathways properly, of early onset of some chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, maybe prediabetes, the problems that you would associate with failure of the mitochondria and oxidative stress. And for a lot of the people that we're working with, a huge portion of their oxidative stress load is coming from chronic gut infections. So you could have a patient whose only problem is prediabetes, and they'll report to you they've never had a GI problem in their entire life. And you'll run this lab, and you'll see something insane on it like a cryptosporidium infection, H. pylori, and yeast overgrowth. And you'll look at the patient and they'll say, no, I never have any digestive problems. I don't think there's an issue there. If you start to treat these GI infections, you reduce the oxidative stress, you reduce the inflammation in the gut, people are going to start to get better. Very basic fundamental concept in naturopathic medicine. The gut really is in charge of all these other body systems. And in order to accurately treat and effectively treat people for any condition, we have to do this thorough assessment of the gut and figure out what infections are present. And again, there's not like a magic bullet. It's not like the GI map test is going to save everyone's practice and make us all saviors. But it, to me, is one of the more exciting tools that's come along in the last maybe 15 years. And I'm pretty hesitant to get super excited about things until I'm pretty sure that it's making a big difference in my own practice. And I've kind of reached that critical threshold now for the GI map. Okay. So we've got Candida. We correct the body systems in the order recurred, talked about that with 3 body systems. In terms of sequencing, working with the neuroendocrine and then GI and then detox systems, why do we put neuroendocrine first? Getting people to feel better, getting inflammation down. Neuroendocrine to me includes adrenal, thyroid, and lifestyle changes as well as working with the brain. So we build up that confidence in the patient, ensure that they're going to be compliant for that hard time when we're treating the GI and when we're starting to detox them. So there's sort of a ray of light in the beginning, preparing that person for that next step emotionally and physically so that they can tackle the hard part and the central part of many programs, which is treating GI problems. And then eventually detoxing, and you could argue back and forth whether treating the GI or detoxing people is more important. I was just at a conference recently where the 2 most intelligent doctors there, one of them spent an hour and a half talking about how the GI tract is central in all the difficult cases she works with, and this other equally intelligent and wonderful researcher and physician got up and talked about how detox was the most important thing. And really, I think in some ways they're inseparable. We just need to really work with them both, just depending on the order that you want to do them in. Okay. So in terms of general treatment programs, we're starting with neuroendocrine, working through treatment phases to clear all the infections as they're present with antibiotics or herbs, depending, and then looking at rebuilding the system, right? So we've got neuroendocrine treatments, dealing with stress reduction, working with the diet, making sure whatever you're doing with the diet is reducing inflammation dramatically. I'm finding really great results now with a lot of patients focusing on plant-based diets, right back to what I was doing in my teens and 20s with plant-based nutrition. I've always done gluten-free diets with patients, but honestly, I think I've been a little meat-heavy in the last 15, 16 years, and coming back to a reduced meat diet and much more of a focus on plant-based nutrition and getting great results with that, really enjoying that. And meeting also a lot of the plant-based, whole foods, plant-based doctors out there. What a wonderful crowd of people and human beings, and starting to really kind of get a sense of that community has been a joy for me lately. Now, in terms of sequencing here and why we start with this, it's the strongest tendency among anyone who has compassion and empathy is to try to treat what I think is the most important thing first, and to try to relieve human suffering as quickly as they can. But when I think about something like D-Day, where the Allies invaded the coast of France and pushed the Germans back to Germany, or where I think even about something simple like when I had 3 young kids that were young and were trying to take a ski trip. I can remember very clearly spending about 5 or 6 hours getting all the equipment ready, getting everything packed in the car, getting the food organized, right? Just to take a ski trip up to Tahoe with a couple of young kids. So, and then how much time do you actually spend skiing, right? It's like, you go down the hill and then it's over and then they're tired and then you bring them home. So the preparation for a ski trip, the preparation for a military operation, that's really the preparation if you're painting a room, right? All the work is in the prep. So when we're treating GI cases, just think it's 99% preparation, 1% execution on killing the bugs. And you just need to do that preparation step so well, so perfectly, that you can roll into the killing phase easily and seamlessly, and your results will be just so much better if you spend the bulk of your time and energy on the preparatory part. Using the diet, stress reduction. Again, I use a lot of adrenal programs. You might work in other ways. Whatever you're doing to reduce stress and inflammation to get that gut ready to clear it out. Okay. Then the next step becomes really easy. You use herbs, depending on the bug. Maybe use antibiotics to clear out the infection. Maybe you support the liver if the first person has liver issues or you're worried about, and you just knock the pathogens out. And really, this step is usually the amount of success you have at this step is predicated on the preparatory step. The better you do the prep work, the more likely this is going to go really smoothly. If that goes smoothly, the final stage is really pretty easy, reevaluation. Strongly encourage people to retest, a good 2 months after you've done the GI treatment. What's one of the things that we found in the research study was that a significant portion of the patients had a new infection on the follow-up test. Whether that was missed by the lab company on the initial test, it was something new that they picked up, not really sure. You could argue that either way, but it's clear that the retesting not only was helpful to verify that the initial infections were gone, but to make sure that there was nothing else left. And we often see people over the series of 2 or 3 GI tests over the course of 6 months or a year that have more than one infection, and it'll show up later on. So retesting, not only important to make sure things are gone, but maybe even more important to make sure that nothing new is going to pop up. Either that was a new infection that they just acquired, or very often something that was more deeply buried that you didn't find on the initial phase of testing. Okay. So again, just to reiterate, the strengthening of SIGA, the strengthening of that immune response in the gut, the reducing of inflammation is really where the GI programs are going to find their biggest push. And I know it's a GI protocol and you want to jump to the GI treatment, but really that initial round of neuroendocrine, stress reduction, and all that good stuff, cleaning up the lifestyle factors, testing and correcting thyroid, adrenals, brain, etc., is going to ensure that the next phase goes really smoothly and easily. And I have consistently seen hard-to-clear infections go away quite easily if I spend that initial 2 months or even longer on the preparatory phase. Okay? And it's also a time to get to know the patient. It's a time to get them focused on the lifestyle changes. It's not a waste of time to wait. It's more like the relationship building phase. Okay? So key insights to focus on, and we'll look at some cases in a second here. Number 1, neuroendocrine system should be improved. Elimination of the pathogen, make sure you verify that it's gone. Make sure you do some retesting. I know it's hard to talk people into doing that, but make sure that you try to focus on the importance of that. Make sure that you talk to patients about how GI pathogens can trigger problems like fatigue and depression. And so if the patient's main complaint is depression, there should be no hesitancy on your part to recommend they do a GI test. And if they push back on you, you just start to talk to them about that GI-brain connection and how inflammation in the body coming from the gut can deplete neurotransmitters, etc. Always screen people with, of course, eating disorders, GI pain, nausea. All these can be signals of GI infections. That's pretty self-evident and obvious. And then making sure that really, and this is kind of how I look at it now and how I try to explain it to patients, is that the GI infections are really, in a sense, stress-related conditions in and of themselves. They're going to flare up when a person's stressed. We're going to be more likely to acquire a GI infection when a patient is stressed. And so looking at it as an isolated problem, like you just randomly picked up a GI infection, not really realistic. The vast majority of people that we're working with are picking up these infections for really clear stress-related reasons. And so that means that we need to be prepared, in how that we're going to, focus on treating these kinds of problems that are straight up stress related, right? Whether it's getting people to sleep better, getting people to start to exercise, really figuring out the diet, whatever those things are, really I see as the beginning of the GI treatment, not as a separate entity from that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Kalish Institute, and then I got a bunch of case studies to look at and some information to show you on the cases. So if you're interested in getting more into functional medicine, if you're interested in making more money, not making more money so you can buy a boat or buy a plane, but making more money so you can have more time for yourself, more time for your family, more time alone, right? Most of the doctors that I talk to, pretty much all of us, are working way too many hours, and we're going to burn out if we don't take care of ourselves. We want to be in our 70s and 80s, super happy and still treating patients. We work with a lot of doctors in the Kalish Institute that also are transitioning from an insurance model to a cash-based model. We have a new class starting July 20th. Super excited about the current groups that we have going. We have a really good community right now. It's really kind of, after 10 years, coming to fruition, and I don't know, I would say it's kind of peaking in my mind. Here's what the community includes. Okay, we have the basic testing that I always talk about. We get into the GI, hormone, and neuroendocrine. We have a year-long program now. We spend many, many months looking at organic acids and really understanding how to adjust patient programs for organic acids. That's become about half my practice now. It's about half the training program too. It's understanding the fundamentals of this test, which I find is not being taught very often. And most of us don't know exactly how to interpret and utilize organic acids. I think it's really just one of the jewels of functional medicine that's not being utilized sufficiently. All kinds of new content. We spent about 2 years rebuilding all this. Philosophy ideas, treatment ideas, getting a lot of patient education tools for you to have. We have a couple hundred really wonderful practitioners that you can interact with, that you can ask questions of and learn from as well. We have the live Q&A calls every week. We have now a couple thousand case studies that go over all the different subjects that you can learn from as well. Okay, so that's a super important thing. And we have a class that's starting July 20th. If you're interested, set up a call. We have both a lecture hall where we have all the lectures housed. We have the online community where you can interact with other doctors. It's really a wonderful group. And we just get the best people. It's not just that my teaching style is wonderful and fun, which I think it is, and people enjoy it, but really what's the best part of this is meeting the other doctors and learning from each other as well. Okay. We have a practice management class, which has been really popular. We've decided now to include that practice management course within the Kalish Method training program to get that as an added bonus. You mentioned the webinar that you're in right now. You get about $500 off. It's about a $15,000 to $20,000 price, I think, value for what we're offering. We're offering it for, 12, 13 grand. So it's underpriced, and I'm fully aware of that. We're trying to make it exciting and something that you have to do, and that money's really not an issue. Certainly we don't get any kind of complaints from doctors like, wow, I don't think that was worth it. We're just really over-delivering things, especially with the practice management component, including all the business advice. Okay, so you can contact us if you're interested. I'll be happy to talk to you about it. All right, and now let's take a look at some more labs. So the GI MAP test is run by a company called Diagnostic Solutions. Okay, Diagnostic Solutions. That for those of you that aren't familiar with them, let me just show their website real quick. Here you go. David Brady, many of you know, and Tony Hoffman created this company. They are in a growth spurt, so give them a little time to get back to you because they're overwhelmed with new doctors coming in. But they're well worth trying to find. Diagnostic Solutions, they're offering us the GI MAP. Okay, so let's look at a few examples of actual tests. You can see what they look like. And I look at these every day. To me, this is actually kind of fun. Sounds maybe a little sick and twisted, but I actually enjoy these tests quite a bit. So let's look at, I'll break it down maybe by section again. Let me start with what I think are the most important sections. Maybe not in the order in which they show them on the lab, but this is to me what are the most important. So right off the bat, I always look at this section here first, parasitic pathogens, crypto. We talked a lot about ehisto already. They're also quite adept at finding giardia. Okay. Then we have H. pylori, I mentioned, and also the virulence factor. So these genetic markers to let you know Is that H. pylori going to cause a huge problem or not? Nice little piece of information. This is a section that's always a little confusing to me. I like the way the report is nice and clean in this particular company. Looking at potential autoimmune triggers like Citrobacter and Klebsiella, and then dysbiotic bacteria like Pseudomonas, etc. So those are not pathogens, obviously, but we still see them causing huge amounts of problems, especially in autoimmune patients. And then this is one of my favorite sections as well, parasites. These are the ones that we always want to know about. Blasto, Dientamoeba fragilis, Endolimex nana, Entamoeba coli, Chilomastix. Okay, these are bugs that, I don't think people die in large numbers from these bugs, right? So they're not considered pathogens in the true sense of the word, but they can be certainly life-ruining. They can be causing joint pain, IBS-type symptoms, extreme fatigue, and depression in a lot of the patients that we work with. So it's really nice to be able to see all these bugs. Yeast overgrowth, we mentioned. Now, one of the limitations of this test is like when they do a standard OMP and they're looking under a microscope, the human being looking under the microscope, if they can see that bug is there, they can name it and write it down on your report. With this kind of testing, with PCR testing, they're only looking for the bugs that are on this list. Now, it's a very extensive list. It's 2 pages long. But, the way that the DNA testing works is they're amplifying the DNA of these bugs that are on the lab. So they're not going to find Ascaris. They're not going to find a roundworm infection, right? Because they're not even looking for them. Okay, so there are some limitations compared to a standard OMP, especially with the worms. And there are some other lab companies out there that are quite good at finding worms, which are kind of notoriously difficult to find. And then they have these additional tests at the bottom of the panel here. SIGA to look at the immune response, anti-gliadin to see if you need to work with gluten-free diet, elastase, which is a marker for pancreatic enzymes, lactoferrin to let you know if there's a lot of inflammation, and then we mentioned earlier also looking for occult blood. Okay, so let's look at a couple more. These are all patients of mine. This one's pretty cool. C. diff. Again, I run these side by side with other stool testing from other companies all the time. And it's really nice. There's certain infections I think that this test pulls out that we're missing a lot. C. diff is one of them. Okay. And this patient had, oh, look at this. This is really amazing, isn't it? Look how many bugs people have. How do people get this sick? It like freaks me out sometimes. So this patient had Dientamoeba fragilis, Endolimex nana, C. diff, and a Candida overgrowth. Yikes. That's a lot to have going on in one person's gut. Now remember, this kind of a patient might only be complaining about depression. Might only be complaining about depression. Okay. Here's another example. Now, when the viral pathogens show up, that's most often self-limiting. This particular patient, this was just someone from a few weeks ago. She had been on a trip, had a couple weeks of a vacation somewhere. She had diarrhea for a few days. We happened to just pick up the end of that GI problem that kind of cleared up on its own. Didn't have to treat that. But she had Endolimex nana. Endolimex nana is kind of a slippery bug. I don't always treat it. I almost always treat it. I found really good benefit most of the time from clearing it for most patients. Sometimes it's kind of a dramatic shift. Sometimes people barely notice it when it's gone. It's not always one that's a life changer, but I'm always kind of suspicious about, if it's worth doing at least an herbal program to clear it out. And then you can see the Candida marker showing up again on this one. So again, I'm going to go through real quick one more time here so you know the basic categories. They're looking for bacterial pathogens. And again, let me pull up the website so you guys can see here. Here's the lab company. It's called Diagnostic Solutions. Give them a little time to respond because they're super busy and they're overwhelmed with doctors right now. Bacterial pathogens, parasitic pathogens, viral pathogens, H. pylori, one of my favorites. They look for normal flora. Opportunistic bacteria, the potential autoimmune triggers. These are really nice for a functional medicine-oriented practice. Super helpful. And yeast and fungal organisms, parasites. Again, not the typical parasites you see on a pathogen profile, but the ones that we look at in functional medicine quite closely are all there for the most part. And secretory IgA, gliadin, pancreatic enzyme marker, inflammatory marker, and occult blood. Okay, so it's done from a single stool sample. It's pretty convenient for patients to do the test. And I'm pretty excited about the technology here. Now, there's nothing really super special about preparing the patient for the lab. You just want to make sure that they haven't just taken some herbs or antibiotics that could impact the accuracy of the test. They seem to be pretty straightforward to run. We haven't gotten patient complaints much. The other stool testing that I do in my practice is usually 3 or 4 stool samples, so people know that that's what I do, and this one is probably easier than most to get patients to comply with actually conducting the test. Okay. And then when we get down to treatment options, let me show you real quick. Here we go. This is usually how the treatments roll out. Start off with a consultation, getting the diet and all the anti-inflammatory stuff figured out, working with the adrenals or perhaps it's the thyroid. And usually around the beginning of month 3, we're treating the H. pylori, we're treating the Giardia, we're starting to clear out the gut bugs. Right when the gut treatments are coming to an end, start to focus more actively on detoxifying the liver. Okay? And that's the basic pathways or the basic sort of sequence that I usually follow. Now, as you all know, it never works the way that we want it to, and these things are adjusted as often as anything. But it's very, very helpful for me to have like a clear patient timeline I'm following, and then with each new patient, I'm adjusting the timeline that's standard rather than making up a brand new timeline for every single new person. Okay. So I'm going to just end on this. There's a few questions that have come in that I'll answer here. Sorry about the sound problem in the beginning. That was horrible. I'm not sure what it was. And then, so yeah, the question about sensitivity of this compared to stool antigen testing for H. pylori. By the way, the test is around $300, something like that. Well, I would say every single side-by-side that I've run with a GI map has included a stool antigen for H. pylori with the other lab company. And honestly, they're about equally yoked in terms of stool antigen testing finding H. pylori or this particular test finding it. Okay. Yeah, I don't think. Well, now, false positives are a really important question, and that's something you should take up with, I'm not a DNA expert, but, you know, for sure, the people that are behind the science of this have all this information for you, and if you're curious about that, I would contact the lab and start to ask them questions, okay? Oh, and I should say one more thing is that, you know, we're doing, in addition to actually starting an amazing class that you guys should all take, we're also going to be talking about some new testing technology in the next free webinar. And we're going to get into looking at the Dutch test for adrenal function. And we'll just give you reports back. Now, I have to say that I don't have a financial stake in any of these lab companies. A lot of these people are my friends, and I know them really well. I'm not going to, you know, be mean to them. And I like to go out to dinner with them and have a martini at a seminar and talk with them and catch up on things. But what I'm always looking for, 100% of the time, and this has been true since the day I started my practice, is what gets me the best results with patients. And that's why I'm trying to bring these things to everyone's attention, because I think these are things that we should know about. We should start to dabble in and look at, see if it's working for you in a way that can get you better patient results. And if it is, great, you adopt it. If you find it's flaky, you don't like the technology, you don't like the people, you don't like their reporting or their turnaround time or something, you know, is upsetting to you about it, then fine. But you know, I'm always trying to put my patients first as much as I can. And I think this technology is really worth all of us knowing about, okay? So if you had questions and I ran out of time here because we're right at the hour, feel free to just email me. Be happy to get back to you. If you're curious about the class, come check us out. I'll be starting a nice group in July, and we'll be starting another group in the fall. And would love to have you all on board and be able to work with you. Okay, have a great rest of your evening, and I'll connect with you in about a month. Okay, bye for now.